In the remote hills of West Virginia, hidden deep in the fog-covered forests, lies a secret that no map marks, no news ever reports. Locals whisper about a family so isolated, so twisted by generations of secrecy, that their children never stepped foot in a school, never saw the world outside. Some say the family is cursed, their lineage corrupted by unnatural patterns and hidden horrors. Others claim that anyone who wandered too close to their cabin never returned, swallowed by the darkness of the hills themselves. Tonight we follow the trail of that forgotten family, uncovering their shocking practices, eerie silence, and the horrifying truth that the world was never meant to know. The hills of West Virginia hide more than trees. They hide a legacy of disturbing secrets. You can almost hear the creaking of the cabin door, the whisper of children who have never learned what lies beyond the trees, and the chilling feeling that you are being watched. Even now, no one dares talk about it, yet the evidence is there, buried under years of neglect, fear, and silence. And tonight, we peel back that veil. But beware, what you're about to hear is not for the faint-hearted. The inbred family of the West Virginia hills is more than a story. It's a nightmare etched into reality. The story begins in a forgotten corner of West Virginia, in a cluster of hills so remote that the nearest paved road lies miles away. Here, the world feels untouched by time, where the wind carries whispers through the skeletal trees, and the sun barely pierces the thick canopy. Locals call it the Lost Hills, a place avoided for generations. Rumors have always swirled about an unusual family living in a rickety cabin deep within the forest, a family that the outside world never truly knew. Some say the first settlers of this clan were so insular that they forbade their children from leaving, forbidding schools, books, and contact with outsiders. Over time, stories grew darker. Neighbors reported fleeting glimpses of oddly behaving children, their eyes unnervingly vacant, their laughter hollow and eerie. No one could recall their names, nor did anyone dare ask. The family became a ghostly presence in the local consciousness. Never seen at markets, never at church, never in town. Yet occasionally the hills would echo with faint cries, the sounds of children wandering under the watch of adults whose features were unsettling and malformed, like twisted reflections of their ancestors. Attempts to intervene were scarce. Even local law enforcement avoided the area, citing dense forests, treacherous terrain, and rumors of dangerous behavior. The elders told tales of family members disappearing for days, returning changed, or not returning at all. Some outsiders who ventured into these hills claimed to have seen the cabin's walls adorned with bizarre carvings, symbols that seemed to record events nobody else was meant to know. The air around the property was always thick, heavy, and almost alive, as if the hills themselves were guarding a terrible secret. It became clear that this was not just a family. It was a living, breathing enigma, one built on isolation, secrecy, and it was late autumn when the first incident drew unwanted attention to the West Virginia hills. A hunter named Carl Whitman had wandered deeper into the forest than he ever intended, following the trail of a wounded deer. As night began to settle in, he stumbled upon something that froze him where he stood. Just beyond the tree line, in a clearing overrun with weeds, he saw a group of children. They were barefoot despite the cold, their clothes nothing more than tattered rags, and their movements strange, almost puppet-like. One of them had sunken cheeks and wide, hollow eyes that glowed eerily in the fading light. Another rocked back and forth, whispering something inaudible to the others. Carl didn't move, but the children suddenly stopped, as though they sensed him. Their heads turned toward him in perfect unison, their pale faces catching the last glint of sunlight. One child let out a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a laugh, something inhuman and broken. Panic shot through Carl, and he sprinted back down the trail, crashing through branches and brush until he reached his truck. He told no one at first, fearful that he had stumbled onto something unspeakable. But Carl wasn't the only one. Over the next few weeks, hikers reported strange sightings in the hills, faint lights flickering in the trees, distant cries of children after midnight. And in one case, a man swore he saw a figure crouched by the roadside with elongated limbs and an oddly shaped face, watching him as he drove past. Each report was dismissed as wild imagination, fueled by the hill's sinister reputation. Still, whispers began circulating in nearby towns. Then came the disappearance. A young woman named Emily Carter, who had been exploring the back roads of West Virginia with her friends, vanished without a trace after telling them she wanted to take a short hike into the woods. Her friends said, for decades, the family that lived in the West Virginia hills had been little more than a ghost story to outsiders. But within the nearby towns, the name Whitakers was whispered with dread. Their history stretched back to the late 1800s, when a man named Elias Whitaker settled in the hills with his two brothers and a cousin. Instead of integrating into surrounding communities, they built their lives in isolation, marrying only within their bloodline. Over the generations, this insularity twisted both their appearance and their behavior. Townsfolk described them as not quite right, with unsettling features, swollen jaws, slanted eyes, and strangely hollow voices that seemed to echo unnaturally in the woods. Children born into the family never attended school. They didn't read, didn't write, and most didn't even speak properly. Communication came through guttural sounds, whistles, and occasional broken words. Locals who caught glimpses of them often left shaken, describing vacant stares that felt more animal than human. Their cabin, patched together with rotting wood and tin scraps, stood as a decaying monument to their separation from the world. Those who dared to get close enough said the air around the cabin reeked of mildew, smoke, and something unidentifiable but foul. Rusted tools were scattered in the dirt yard, and odd carvings, circles, crosses, and jagged symbols were etched into the wooden posts. Dogs in the area would howl relentlessly if brought anywhere near the family's land, refusing to step closer. Yet despite all this, there was no official record. Authorities avoided the hills, preferring not to tangle with what they called a private family matter. Locals were left to deal with the sightings, the strange cries at night, and the gnawing fear that the Whitakers were more than just a strange family. They were dangerous. Some said the children's. The disappearance of Emily Carter had shaken the nearby towns, and though authorities had ended their official search, whispers persisted. It was then that two amateur investigators, brothers with an interest in Appalachian folklore, decided to uncover the truth. Armed with cameras, flashlights, and notebooks, they made their way into the lost hills under the cover of night. Locals had warned them not to go. The family doesn't like visitors, one old man muttered, but curiosity overpowered caution. For hours they trudged through the thick brush until the forest thinned, revealing a faint dirt path marked with strange footprints, bare, twisted, uneven. Following the trail, they reached a clearing where a small structure stood in silence. The cabin looked like it could collapse at any moment, but faint candlelight flickered through a broken window. One of the brothers raised his camera, zooming in. What he saw through the lens chilled him. A figure crouched by the fire inside, rocking back and forth. Its head turned suddenly toward the window, revealing a distorted face with sunken eyes and a slack jaw. They froze. Then came the sound, low guttural calls echoing from the woods behind them. At first, it seemed like the howl of an animal, but soon the calls shifted, blending into broken words and whistles. The forest was alive with it, closing in from all sides. Terrified, they backed away, snapping a few blurry photographs before retreating into the dark. One of them swore he saw children crawling along the ground just beyond the tree line, their limbs bending in unnatural ways, their eyes reflecting the light like predators. When they finally stumbled back into town, pale and trembling, they showed their photographs to a few locals. Most shook their heads, refusing to look for long. "That's them," a shopkeeper whispered, "the family that never leaves the hills. You were..." For years, the townsfolk had believed the Whitakers were merely a secluded, inbred family, living in self-imposed exile. But when investigators returned to review the brothers' abandoned notebook, they uncovered details that hinted at something far more sinister. The notes described symbols carved not only on the family's cabin, but on trees deep in the woods, strange spirals and intersecting lines that seemed ritualistic. Alongside crude sketches were words written in shaky handwriting. Children kept underground. The investigators began interviewing locals who had once worked in nearby coal mines. One elderly miner recalled hearing faint cries from beneath the earth decades ago. Not the cries of animals, he insisted, but children. Children who never saw daylight. He said the Whitaker land stood atop an abandoned mine shaft sealed in the 1930s. Rumors spread that the family had turned those tunnels into a labyrinth where children were hidden away, raised in darkness, never knowing the outside world. This revelation cast Emily Carter's disappearance in a horrifying new light. If she had been taken, she was not held in the cabin, but somewhere far worse, buried alive beneath the hills in a subterranean prison. One deputy, haunted by the case, decided to investigate despite his colleagues' warnings. With a small team, he ventured toward the Whitaker property one stormy night. At first, the cabin appeared lifeless, its windows dark. But as the deputy approached, the silence shattered. From beneath the ground came muffled wails, voices of children crying, groaning, and muttering incoherent words. The team froze, their flashlights sweeping over the yard until one beam illuminated a crude wooden hatch half buried under dirt and leaves. Before they could open it, movement erupted from the trees. Figures emerged, thin, pale, and distorted, with hollow eyes that reflect. The deputy who survived the stormy night never returned to the Whitaker Hills, but his account inspired a small group of journalists and true crime enthusiasts to push deeper. They believed they could finally expose the truth, prove to the world that the legends of the Inbred family weren't just rumors. Equipped with cameras, drones, and recording gear, they ventured into the forest during daylight, hoping the light would protect them. At first, the hills were silent. Birds called overhead, and the forest seemed alive, but not threatening. Yet, as they neared the cabin, an unnatural stillness fell over the woods. The air grew heavy, the temperature dropped, and their footsteps echoed strangely, as though the trees themselves were listening. One of the journalists raised a drone into the sky. The camera buzzed upward, capturing the rotting cabin from above, and something else. Behind the cabin, half hidden by brush, lay several crude wooden crosses planted in the dirt, their surfaces carved with jagged markings. Graves. Before they could investigate further, the ground beneath them vibrated faintly. Then came the sound, the same guttural calls described in the deputy's report, rising from the forest on all sides. Panic set in. They scrambled back toward the trail, but the path had vanished, swallowed by thickets and shadows that hadn't been there minutes before. Suddenly, one of them screamed. From the corner of their vision, pale figures darted between trees, moving in unnatural, jerking motions. The air was filled with broken words, whistles, and choked cries. One journalist, clutching his camera, was dragged into the underbrush by unseen hands, his cries muffled almost instantly. The others ran blindly, crashing through branches until they reached a ravine. With no other choice, they slid down the slope, scraping skin and tearing clothes, until they landed in a shale, low stream below. But the horror didn't stop. From above, shadows leaned over the edge, watching. Some emitted that awful half-laugh, half-scream sound. Others simply stood still, their hollow eyes unblinking. One of the survivors later swore that a child crawled down the slope toward them, its movements spider-like, its head cocked at an impossible angle. Somehow, the group managed to escape, stumbling into town hours later, bloodied, terrified, and missing one of their own. Their footage was grainy, distorted, almost useless. But one frame was clear. A pale face peering directly into the camera, mouth wide, eyes blank. Proof, or a warning, In the weeks after the journalists' escape, their story spread online like wildfire. Clips of distorted audio, blurry images of pale figures, and that one chilling frame of a face staring directly into the lens fueled countless debates. Some dismissed it all as an elaborate hoax. Others claimed it was the most disturbing proof yet of something long hidden in the West Virginia hills. The missing journalist was never found. His name was quietly added to the growing list of people who had entered the Lost Hills and never returned. Authorities refused to comment publicly, issuing only a vague statement about unconfirmed reports and no ongoing threat to the community. But behind closed doors, locals whispered that even law enforcement had been warned away. Search parties never entered the area again. The hills had reclaimed their silence, their secret unbroken. For the people living nearby, life carried on, but not without unease. Strange cries were still heard at night, echoing from deep within the forest. Drivers along the back roads reported seeing pale figures at the tree line, watching in silence. Some claimed that children, filthy, hollow-eyed, barefoot, approached their cars when they broke down near the hills, only to vanish back into the woods when help arrived. The legend of the Whitaker family became more than just folklore. It became a modern ghost story, one rooted in fact, one with names and faces attached. Yet no one dared to venture close enough to confirm the truth. The cabin still stands, its walls rotting, its windows dark, waiting for the next curious soul, foolish enough to approach. And beneath it, if the stories are true, tunnels still stretch under the earth, carrying the cries of children who never saw a school, never learned the world, never escaped the cage of blood and secrecy they were born into. The hills remain, timeless and unmoved. Our trees whisper with every gust of wind, as if mocking those who try to understand. And while the world continues to speculate, the people closest to the hills know better. They know that some places are not meant to be disturbed. Some families are not meant to be found. And some secrets, once uncovered, will never let you go. Because in the West Virginia hills, the truth doesn't set you free. It buries you alive.